Good afternoon and good morning to everyone joining us to this Gecko series of webinars on gender and mitigation. We are expecting a few more participants to join us, so I would like to ask you to please bear with us and wait for a couple of minutes. We'll get started very soon. Thank you for having joining us.
Hello, everyone. This is Andrea. I'm helping with the organization of this webinar. We seem to be having a few technical difficulties with getting Anna online. But in the meantime, we very much want to welcome you to this webinar. This is the third in a series of webinars that we'll be hosting under the Gender Equality for Climate Change Opportunities Initiative, and we're focusing in this webinar on what we learned from the COP21. I think Anna might be back. Do I hear her online now?
Hi.
Great.
Can you hear me
yeah,
now?
I hear you, Anna. Yes.
Thank you.
I'll hand over to you again now.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, everyone. I am sorry we've been experiencing some technical difficulties, but I think we should have everything under control by now. Let me get started by, again, welcoming all of you to our series of webinars. As Andrea said, my name is Ana Rojas, and I would like to thank you participants for joining us on our three great panelists who are here with us today. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank USAID for their support to our Gecko initiative and for making this series of webinars possible. Before we get into matters, I would like to run a few housekeeping matters with you. First of all, we are expecting a large number of participants joining. So as you would see, you are muted through the course of the webinar. If you have questions or comments, we would like to ask you to please share this with us using the chat function. That you can use it. You can find it in the bar that is to your right-hand side in the screen. Maggie Roth will be supporting us with any technical difficulties, and she's also going to help us compile the questions that you're putting forward, and this would be presented to the panelists at the end of the webinar. Sorry. You could also see that to your right-hand side in the tools section, you will find a location for sharing documents, and we've uploaded there two documents for you to hand out. One is the fact sheets of the Gecko initiative, and the second one is IUCN's latest brief on gender and mitigation, which examines how gender has been addressed in the INDCs, LEDs, and NAMAs. And just also to let you know that the video of this webinar and its presentations are going to be made available online in a couple of, in early next week, through our green platform, our gender and renewable energy platform, which is a website resource where you can find the latest documents on the topic and also our videos. So with that, I would like to get started with our presentation and a webinar, just highlighting again that Gecko is a USAID-funded initiative that is designed to advance women's empowerment in climate change and development initiatives. And one of the pillars of Gecko, it's an energy work, where we support discussions linking the energy sector with the mitigation sector and the gender sector. So we are doing this through a knowledge platform and creating new knowledge documents. And of course, also spreading the word through this series of webinars. For today's webinar, we have four framing questions. Now that countries have presented their INDCs, what is expected from us in terms of the mechanisms and implementation of these commitments after COP21? We've also found that there are parties who are showing leadership in the mitigation and gender commitments, and we want to know how translated into concrete actions. Which gender tools may be available for parties to address gender in mitigation initiatives, because this is one of the biggest questions that we keep on hearing. Well, if I want to address gender, how could I do this? And Lorena is going to help us address that. And again, which are the main findings and recommendations that have been put forward by parties to the UNFCCC in terms of mitigation and technology. And here Flora is going to help us also go a little bit deeper into what it is that's existing and how can parties move forward. In the agenda, well, first of all, we have the introduction and welcome to all panelists. Then we're going to have Alexander Ocht sharing with us about the COP21 outcomes, how INDCs play a role in them, and what could be the future implementation of these tools. Sorry, my bad. Again, then, just gender mainstreaming in the UNFCCC framework. This will be presented by Fleur Newman from the Secretariat, and Lorena Aguilar from IUCN is going to help us with the gender mainstreaming and implementation of COP21. We will later on go into the section of questions and answers, where we are expecting to, of course, have all your participation coming up. If you're interested in receiving additional information, we would like to ask you to reach out to us either through our green platform or through the emails that you are seeing here on your screen. I would like now to first go and invite Alexander Ocht as a presenter. Alexander is a Senior Director of Climate and Energy at the World Watch Institute in Washington, D.C., where he leads a growing team of researchers and is a member of the Institute's management team. Alexander is also during the course of his career, Alex has been engaged on climate and energy issues at the highest level in decision-making of all major world regions. His areas of expertise include climate, energy, and environment policies of corporations, municipalities, provinces, and countries in all regions around the world. In 2010, he developed a methodology to design development pathways that are economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable and can be applied at any level, from the local to the global. And Alexander, I would like to invite you also to share with us your insights as to how COP21 is shaping the way we're going to be doing mitigation in the future.
Thank you very much. I hope you all hear me well. Thank you, Anna. This is an important opportunity to talk about the outcomes of the Paris Summit and where it leaves us and what needs to happen now. So I want to thank you and your colleagues at the Gecko initiative for inviting me. I've been asked by the organizers to present on COP21, on the concept of INDCs, and on other future implementation tools. And I have about 10 to 15 minutes to do that, and then my understanding is we'll have a discussion later on where we're going to have more time to dig a little bit deeper. So here's the overview of what I'm going to talk about. It's going to be the three sections that the title already suggests. We'll discuss whether COP21 is a historical milestone, and in order to assess that, I will look a little bit into the content of the agreement, and trying to get at answering the question of whether it is a working framework for future action. Secondly, I will zoom into the concept of countries' contributions, or as they are dubbed, intended nationally determined contributions. So what are they and what's in them, and where do they get us? And then third and final, I will look into the concepts, some other concepts, and the future tools of the action that needs to happen now. So in this section, I will briefly describe where I believe Paris leaves us. And I'm hoping in the little time that I have, you're not expecting me to go through all of the details of the agreement. The document can easily be found online. And as mentioned before, we can also dive a little bit deeper into individual issues that are of particular interest to you in the discussion later. But what I will try to do is I will try to put the treaty a little bit into context and evaluate whether it's meaningful and what we can build on in the future. So can Paris be considered a historical milestone? If you follow closely, you will see that here in the headline, the question mark that I used in the overview is already missing. And indeed, I do believe it is a very historical milestone, but that by no means guarantees that we are going in the right direction. So how does this make sense? It does make sense because it is an agreement that has all the necessary components that we do need for future action. I'm going to look a little bit closer into these. It has all the right goals. It has everybody on board. It has all the instruments and tools that we need. But it is really, in a way, just a starting point. Action, it's a framework for action. The action itself has not yet happened. So it is a decisive moment, Paris, as we have been able to achieve a strong agreement, but it is really only a framework of action. That's a key assessment, I think. So it could also be that in the future, at some distant point in the future, we're going to look back and we will come to the conclusion that Paris could not stop the pollution of our climate, that it was just a stepping stone and a historical milestone in the direction of really a human-made, a self-made disaster, a catastrophe. So Paris, of course, did not come out of the blue. It has been in the making for a very long time. It's basically the result of a quarter of a century of scientific analysis and political negotiation, and a history of successes and many mistakes, where most of us will probably agree that altogether we were in the past only able to take slower steps than what was politically and in terms of joint agreement on what needs to happen on climate change than what science told us was needed. I'm not going to the details of the history of the UNFCCC, but I picked basically 4 milestones on the way to Paris. The first one is the 1992 Framework Convention, which established the long-term objectives, most importantly to really do what climate policy should do, which is to prevent dangerous climate change and better deal with its consequences, with the consequences of what cannot be prevented. It establishes many of the important principles that we still build on today. For example, that needs to be seen against the background of broader sustainability, of sustainable development that also includes, importantly, includes social and economic principles and orientations. Most importantly, it already includes the concept that still we have in the Paris Agreement today of common but differentiated commitments of all nations. And built on this Framework Convention 1992 and 1995, we then started a process of annual COPs and many smaller meetings in between. An important moment occurred in 1997 when a first protocol was established, and this protocol established binding emission targets for developed countries. Developing countries, in contrary to what's often portrayed, have been part of the Kyoto Protocol and supported its goals, but have not committed to mandatory reduction commitments themselves. And what then happened is known to probably most of you. The United States played an important role in this, as it was a signatory of the treaty, but then did never ratify the treaty in 2001, and the new government finally withdrew from the accord. And this was, in a way, the the beginning of the end of it all, and this story then really culminated in 2009 in Copenhagen, a conference which before was dubbed to be Copenhagen, but then really became, for many observers, Floppenhagen. Floppenhagen in the sense that it was seen by most observers as a flop. And why was it? Because it was really, in a way, the end of this top-down process of agreeing goals at the UN level and then distributing burdens amongst individual nations. This didn't lead anywhere. There was just not enough support for this architecture of a treaty. But in many ways from today, we could also say that 2009 Copenhagen and then the year later, 2010, the Cancun Agreement laid also the groundwork of a new approach that then culminated in Paris this year, of a bottom-up approach where countries are bringing actions to the table voluntarily, and where hopefully this former architecture that was very much built on, if you followed negotiations closely as I did, of how can I possibly do less than what you do, hopefully we'll say at some point in the future this was the important turning point where this became a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom, and countries competed on stronger actions rather than on lesser commitments. So what is in the Paris Agreement? Let me briefly talk about this a little bit. So I have 3 slides on this. First of all, I would say it is all the right goals that we have in it, all the right motives, if you want. It is based on science. The International Panel on Climate Change gives important input to the climate negotiations regularly. And it says that the world temperature increase needs to stay below 2 or even 1 point. The latest science is more pointing to the fact that probably 2 degrees is still too high, rather 1.5 degrees Celsius of a global temperature increase, and this is explicit in the treaty. The treaty also asks countries to do whatever they can to see emissions peak as soon as possible. And for the future, there will be regular reviews of science informing the political process. And beyond what has happened in the past, of the typical IPCC reports of what the latest state of science is and what can be done about it, there was an explicit ask of IPCC to deliver a report by 2018 of scenarios that can keep us at 1.5 degrees Celsius and below. So it's based on science. Secondly, it is targeting what I think is important, not just climate goals, but it presents the climate goals as part of a broader economic, social, and environmental sustainability agenda. So environmental, of course, not just being climate, but also local air and water pollution, biodiversity, and so on. So as an example for the important parts that we're going to talk about a lot more at this webinar today, the empowerment of women, intergenerational equity as important social pillars of future human action and really of running our countries and the economies and our life together. So this is all in there. So I would argue it has all the right goals. Secondly, it's all aboard. Everybody is in there. It is a treaty that is a consensus of all 196 parties that have been present at the conference. And it still is based on the principle of 1992 of a common but differentiated responsibility. So what does that mean concretely? Wealthy nations need to take the lead. But this time around, developing and emerging countries have also committed to decarbonize their future economic growth, to reduce emissions, at least as compared to business as usual. And then for the least developed countries, these have been excluded from reduction commitments, but there will be support for them to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. There are legal components of the treaty and non-mandatory ones. So legal ones, for example, include, in the sense of the Vienna Convention, of a valid international treaty, if you may, long-term goals, the long-term goals of staying below 2 degrees Celsius, a commitment for regular reporting, so measuring actions and reporting and verifying actions, but it also has important non-mandatory components, and those include the INDCs that I will talk about in a moment. So overall, I would say it's all in the box. We have mitigation goals that are aiming at reducing emissions fast enough to achieve future temperature goals. There's adaptation goals, for example, the commitment of countries to put added focus on activities and to submit adaptation communications regularly that show their support needs and the plans of adaptation. This also includes a text as to loss and damage, so to strengthen the ability to recover from climate change impacts in the future. And it has very important financial commitments, $100 billion by 2020 that we saw in earlier commitments already, but this time around countries have committed to define a clear roadmap on how they want to reach the 100 billion by 2020 that are supposed to be handed to poorer countries, most importantly least developed countries, to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Importantly, it has, as it is not everything in it is binding, and there is for the commitments there is no system of sanctions. It does include, which is important for if you want to reach some competition towards mitigation and adaptation, transparency and accountability mechanisms. So that will allow the sort of naming and shaming that we can see in the future. Countries can be held accountable in the future. So I'm coming to my final part already. INDCs and what they are and what's in them. So INDCs, it's really a concept that has been introduced in 2013, and what they are today is they're not really INDCs anymore. Technically, they are now NDCs, so nationally determined contributions, and not intended contributions, because they have been brought into the treaty before Paris. And what they do is they are collected and submitted. They have been collected and submitted prior to Paris, and they now allow the tracking of collective progress of what countries are willing to do in order to mitigate and adapt to climate change. The next round of these INDCs is due 9 to 12 months before the COP in 2020, and the commitment phase then is within the time frame between 2020 and 2030. So what's important to say about this is that countries in the future cannot reduce their ambition. They can only they have committed to become more ambitious in the future. I need to rush a little bit through these slides now because I'm running out of time. But countries were bringing these action to the table voluntarily. So what is in the INDCs shows tremendous variety. Some countries have metrics of absolute economy-wide emission targets, particularly many of the developed countries have that. Others commit to goals that reduce from what would be considered business as usual. Others have intensity targets, or the intensity of the economies, or in terms of per capita. So the targets are measured in many different ways, many different metrics. I give you some examples here on the slide below. And so it's a somewhat complicated way to evaluate what the real absolute reduction of all countries, of individual countries and all countries together is going to be. So, but what's interesting to see is that the latest analysis of what these pledges all together really mean show that the likely business as usual scenario in this century, which would lead to 2.7 degrees Celsius increase, 3.6 degrees Celsius will, through the INDCs, if they are implemented, be reduced by about a degree, a little bit less than that, 0.9 degrees Celsius. So instead of the 3.6 degrees Celsius, if the INDCs are implemented, we're hoping to see 0.9 degrees less warming. And this, of course, is not enough, but it shows you the significance of the INDCs that have been submitted if they are implemented. The gap, a lot more needs to happen, of course, and the gap can, to some degree, be reduced by increased effort from countries that have conditional targets. So not all countries have said we do this in any case. They have said we do more if other countries act as well, or if we receive financing to do these additional actions. So these conditional targets would further reduce the warming. And then my hope, and that of many of my colleagues, of course, is that the co-benefits, the positive co-benefits of climate mitigation will show, we will start to see in over the next years, and these co-benefits can then offset the cost of stronger action, more ambitious goals. Sorry, this is really the final section. I'm going to skip most of what I have in here to give my co-presenters enough time to present their slides. But the idea of this slide is basically to show that INDCs are just the latest addition to a vast toolbox in international climate policies. There's also what's being called nationally appropriate mitigation action NAMAs, which are projects or programs of countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. These NAMAs are linking into the INDCs. How? They are sectoral programs or individual projects that countries will now move forward to reach the international commitments in the INDCs. And then let's at yet another method, yet another concept is overarching. So it is a broader development strategy that that links into both the INDCs and the NAMAs. For me, it's not important how we call our actions. It's important that the action is going to happen now. And we can maybe talk a little bit more about this. There's other mechanisms like the market mechanisms that are like the clean development mechanism, joint implementation, emission trading, carbon taxes that made it into this agreement again. So this is one of my last slides. If you go now one level below and you look at what individual countries have to do, then you will see that some analysis is needed for how they can reach their INDCs and their overarching low emission development goals. And for that, I just gave you one example here that I hope you can look into more closely. When you download the presentation, you find a lot of information about this online. This is just one way, for example, how I and my team at WorldWatch, how we do sectoral assessments, in this case in the energy sector. So there needs to be a technical component looking into your potential for clean energy solutions. There needs to be a socio-economic, needs to be socio-economic analysis. What's the impact of different energy pathways on energy prices? Are jobs at risk or not? The important issue of gender that we're discussing here today is part of the analysis of different pathways. How does it empower women, or does it put their rights at risk further? A financial and policy assessment, so a financial assessment, most importantly, of what are investment hurdles for investments into sustainable energies, and how can these hurdles be moved out of the way? And that gets me to the final part at the very center of it. Those are then the policy recommendations that will make this happen, that move the hurdles, the financial investment hurdles out of the way, and put countries on a path to emission reductions, in this very case in the energy sector. This is really just 20 seconds. There is a toolkit out there that you can find easily if you Google energy toolkit of the low emission development strategies global partnership that Ana Rojas and I are both involved in. You will find individual tools there that help countries quantify their potentials for emission reductions, that look into help them plan emission reductions economy-wide. that assess the social impacts and the environmental impacts as well. And I hope that we can, in the next version of this toolkit, also showcase the work that the Gecko initiative has done. With this, I thank you very much. I'm sorry that I went over time, but it was a demanding issue as well. As I hope you will agree, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. It's been really interesting listening to your presentation and actually particularly understanding which are the steps that need to follow in terms of implementation. And I'm hoping also through the questions that you, our participants, are posting through the chat, that we can go a little bit deeper, perhaps afterwards, in terms of understanding a little bit better how this implementation can be addressed in the energy sector. With that note, I also want to remind our participants to post questions and comments, and to put also the name of the person you're addressing them to. Maggie and I will be collecting your questions for afterwards. I want to now ask Fleur Newman for the floor. Fleur is an environmental lawyer by background, an international environmental lawyer by background. She is currently a program officer at the UNFCCC Secretariat on the Sustainable Development Mechanism Program, and most importantly for us at this moment, she is also the gender focal point. Fleur is the lead officer of the Gender and Climate Change Agenda item under the COP and the SBI, and she is responsible for leading the implementation of the Secretariat's Gender Equity Strategy and Action Plan. Fleur also manages the Secretariat's participation in the UN SWAP, which acts as an accountability framework for advancing the role of women and mainstreaming gender in the Secretariat's work under the Convention and the Kyoto Protocol. And now, going forward with the Paris Agreement and decision. So Fleur, the floor is yours for sharing with us how the Secretariat is now supporting parties and how we're moving forward on gender under the Convention.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you. I'd like to join Alexander in thanking Gecko for the invitation. It's an important topic and one I'm very happy to be sharing with you, and thank you to all the participants for joining us in this discussion. I'll move straight into my presentation. I am looking a little differently than perhaps Alexander and Lorena in that I'm looking a little bit before Paris and what has led us to what we received in Paris, and I'll leave it to Lorena to talk about whether or not what we have now got in Paris has in fact enhanced what we already had. So in 2012 was not the first decision on gender under the UNFCCC, but what it did do was create a foundation for developing a more comprehensive approach to how gender is managed under the UNFCCC. So the Doha decision was strongly focused on the goal of gender balance, both in delegations and in bodies constituted under the Convention and the Protocol, and in decision-making bodies. There was perhaps some disappointment that it...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we seem to be having issues with your screen.
Oh, okay.
Could you see if you're sharing it? Apologies to the participants for this.
Let me see. I had said show my screen. Yes?
Yes, now we can see it. Thank you, Fleur.
Okay. Sorry about that. So yes, so on what it does do, what it did do is require the Conference of the Parties to consider gender and climate change at every COP from then on, and also request the Secretariat to monitor and to report on the gender composition of the constituted bodies and delegations. And this just provides us with an opportunity to support parties in tracking progress on the goal. Numbers are important, but obviously not enough. And so 2 years later, building on that work, the Lima Work Program on Gender provided a number of key activities, and it was a shift in the focus from the concept and goal of gender equality to much more of a focus on implementation. So the first year of the Lima Work Program on Gender was 2015, so last year, and that included activities that had been specifically mandated to the Secretariat, including a workshop, and for the purpose of Gecko and Gecko's work, the workshop was a first in that it focused on gender responsiveness in the context of climate change and mitigation and technology development and transfer. And this was the first time that these topics had been considered in the context of how gender and the participation and empowerment of women impacts on the work in that area. The Secretariat was also requested to report on its own policies on gender, and that's also a first. It's showing a trend of parties being more engaged in the topic and looking to find ways in which they can identify gaps and challenges so as to move the implementation on the ground. And I think the other aspect of the Lima Work Program is that there's also a strong focus on the role of other organisations, so not just the Secretariat and not just parties, but those who are involved in supporting work on the ground. And from my perspective as the gender focal point, 2015 was significant in the increase in collaboration between the Secretariat and other organisations in being able to further this work in a meaningful way in terms of IUCN helped us with a comprehensive compilation of gender-related UNFCCC decisions, which helped us to map out as a first step, and to identify that, in fact, many of the decisions in relation to gender, the responsibility for implementation of those decisions rests with parties. And so the next step for us is then to work out how best to support parties in that implementation. There was a follow-up to the workshop which was held in June last year, and the expert group meeting was held in October, and it really gave us an opportunity to look more closely at some of the things that had been raised in the workshop around the challenges, in particular in relation to mitigation and in financing that mitigation, and the issues that women in particular have, and women entrepreneurs, but also just in terms of work where women are not necessarily being consulted in the development of programs and policies that are being put in place, and that reduces the effectiveness of those policies. And that collaboration, as I say, is significant and important part of how we at the Secretariat and parties can deliver real outcomes. And I'm just going to take just a moment to show you where you will find information on gender and climate change on the UNFCCC website, because it's not always the easiest website to navigate. So there is in fact a focus area on the left-hand side menu, and then there is a gender and climate change web page where we post all of the information that relates to activities, but also information on technical reports and those sorts of things. And this is a work in progress. It's one of the key issues that we're looking at in this first half of the year is how we can better communicate the information which is available. It's a challenge to find the right information for a particular issue. There are lots of toolkits and guidelines out there, but the accessibility of those is perhaps the most challenging thing. So we are working on how we can better communicate and facilitate the exchange of information in relation to climate change, gender, and in particular mitigation and technology development and transfer. I think one of the recurring themes that came out of all of the activities last year under the Lima Work Programme, and perhaps is also a common theme more generally in mainstreaming gender, is that you need to be able to see how to change the status quo. It's always challenging to change the status quo. It's even more challenging when you cannot see how that can be done. And so I think the power of the exchange of information about the successful implementation of gender mitigation and technology projects, but also equally as important is understanding those that didn't work. And so the workshop, the expert group meeting, the side events at COP21, which were all sort of focused on the area of implementation, this was a key theme, is that we need to find ways of communicating those stories of success. And it also came out in what was an unusual subsidiary body for implementation session in Paris, because of course the focus was on delivering the Paris Agreement, as it should have been, but we still saw a furthering of the work on gender, and I think this also speaks to the importance that parties are placing on ensuring that the momentum that was started in Doha and was built on in Lima continues going forward. And significantly, the decision, the conclusion in the SBI was to request that further work was done by the Secretariat on a technical paper which is due to be published this year and for consideration at the next session, which speaks to the need to gather in one place all of the tools and guidelines that are available to people with the nexus of gender and climate change, whether that's mitigation, adaptation, technology development, transfer, finance, resilience, all of those issues, and understanding what is in fact available if you're looking to implement action. And that technical paper will be available before the session in May. And we've been asked to add just a little component to that technical paper, but also more to the issue of the storytelling. One of the things that we've been asked to do is look at how we can work with other organisations on capturing and making publicly available good policy and good practice examples of gender-responsive mitigation and technology development and transfer policies, and to also explore other ways in which gender responsiveness can be integrated in technology needs assessment. So the upcoming session in May will be focused on adaptation, capacity building, and the training of delegates. And in November in Marrakesh, there will be a review of both the Doha decision and progress on implementation of gender decisions more generally under the convention. So it's just finally, I think this is what this progress has shown, is that there is interest by parties, and there starts to be an understanding of what the importance is of ensuring that there's not just representation of women in the convention processes the negotiations, but it's just as vital to ensure that there is real and meaningful participation in projects. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Fleur. I think it's been very clear how the path that you've been sketching for us, and it's extremely interesting to hear you talk about this technical paper coming up in a few months, and I, for one, would be very happy to look at it and read it when it's out. So I cannot wait for it to be available. With that, I also want to invite Lorena Aguilar to take the floor. And before I introduce Lorena, of course, keep on reminding you participants to share your comments and questions with us. Lorena is the Global Senior Gender Advisor for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, a position she's held since 2002, and which has followed more than a decade working with IUCN. She has over 30 years of experience in projects and initiatives at all levels, involving public policy, development, building local institutions, and incorporation of social and gender issues into sustainable development efforts. Lorena has vast experience providing assistance to international organizations, governments, and universities on gender policy, gender equality, and government women's empowerment, as well as on water, forest, environmental, health, and disaster risk reduction. Her expertise serves hundreds of partners organizations and has transformed the institutional identity of IUCN itself. This is a woman who's traveled the world and done brilliant work also through her life. Lorena, I want to give you the floor to share with us how you see that gender equality will be moving forward now.
That everybody can hear me, and it's and I'm going to repeat a little bit of the things very fast of what Fleur pointed out, but I think it is important for us to understand that this has been a very long process to try to mainstream gender within the climate change work. We need to understand that from the three conventions, the one that really did not incorporate gender considerations from the onset was UNFCCC, and that before 2007 we did not have any single reference. So we have to really embrace ourselves and celebrate how far we have come since then. But also this is also true in the other frames of work of other institutions like the CIF, in which we have seen also gender absent at the beginning, and then little by little moving forward and really embracing these principles. However, still a lack of understanding on the how. That is also a challenge that we're going to face with more than 45 decisions that we have right now, and as Fleur was pointing out, is the how do we unfold and implement the decisions that have been taken. And we can see that, for example, in the CIF, with the CTF having really a lot of work still to be done in order to bring gender in big renewable energy projects, for example. And we saw the same circumstances happening in the CDM when very few of the projects really used and embraced the only gender indicator that was present. As I said before, and Fleur was pointing out, we have 45 decisions. Adaptation is the area with the most robust gender-inclusive language so far. Mitigation has the fewest decisions, even though we're trying to move forward in really trying to understand what it is. And now that the framework has put gender equality as a guiding principle, there is still much work to do in that respect. And as Fleur was mentioning, the Lima Work Program on Gender and Gender under the new framework do provide us a guidance and should also help us move into making a difference where it matters, that it's the national level. So very fast, I mean, those
Lorena, I'm sorry,
yes?
but we don't see your slides moving.
You don't?
There seems to be a problem with the screen. It's frozen. Yes, now we can see it where you were. Thank you.
You are at COP decisions by now? Can you see
now
that?
we can see you.
Okay, sorry.
Yes. Thank you.
So you can see there where we have this is updated information on the last decisions by theme, and you can see how this has been unfolding. A lot on the need to build that capacity, 9 on finance, which is fundamental for this new stage that we're going to start, and 4 dealing with mitigation. Now, from these decisions, we have gender as an item on the COP agenda. CTCN has a lot, and Fleur talked about the need to work on this. The Green Climate Fund has now a policy. NWP, Gender and Traditional Knowledge, has conducted a series of workshops and case studies in this respect. And of course, education on Article 6 is present. And I think the most unique thing in this last year is to have, for the first time ever, all the financing mechanisms have gender mandates and have gender policies and have plans of actions or are in the processes of developing these plans of actions. And this is an incredible opportunity to move forward the decisions, because the countries needs precisely to engage with these financing mechanisms. So you have the decisions and you have the financing mechanisms ready to embrace these principles, and that really opens the space for us to support the implementation of these new decisions. I'm not going to go through the Lima work program, but again, as Fleur was pointing out, is probably the most important decision because it directs us to implementation and not only to count women and men's participation in the different bodies, which is important, but is fundamental that we start concentrating more and more when it comes to implementation. The new framework, acknowledging gender equality and empowerment of women as in the preamble as important, and also talking in Article 7 of adaptation and Article 7 on capacity building.
Lorena, I'm sorry. The slide kept on. It's still in the decisions of the COP. I'm very sorry.
Is now the framework? Can you see the new framework?
No.
I'm so sorry. Is it moving forward now, Anna?
No.
No?
No.
I don't know what to do. Okay, let me on. Is that now?
Now it is working again.
Really strange. I don't know what it's happening. I'm really sorry. So I was saying that, let me go back to this one. Can you see it now, the new framework, the preamble?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, sorry. So as I was referring the new framework in that preamble, we have a mention of acknowledging gender equality and empowerment of women as a guiding principle under the framework. And we have 2 mentions in Article 7 on adaptation and on Article 11 on capacity building. Some people consider that it's a pity that we don't have it on mitigation, that we don't have it on the operational level, but right now, in the next year, is the challenge to take that guiding principle that is in the preamble and unfolding this into the other areas and in the other topics, especially mitigation, as Fleur was saying, in technology in that sense. And as Alexander was pointing out, INDCs also will become a very important way of moving all those decisions that we have on gender and the mandates under the new framework. The EGI, the Environmental Gender Index analysis, we have 37.5% of the INDCs that had been submitted by January of this year mention gender and women. Unfortunately, these correspond only to 18% of the countries of the GHG emissions from 2012. But INDCs do offer, and a lot of the donors are going to go right now to the implementation of the INDCs, and we really need to focus on the how. How can we support the countries? As Fleur was saying, the majority of the decisions implies that the parties have to be the one implementing them. So how can we help them in these processes, such as the INDCs, to really fulfill the mandates? This is how gender is in the INDCs, and 15 of them referencing women or gender in the adaptations, 11 inclusive only in the introduction, and 31 mentioning it both in adaptation and mitigation. So we have work to do with those countries, but also a lot of work to do with those countries that did not incorporate gender in their INDCs, and trying to see how also we can support them in that. Now, what is important, that gender in climate change needs to anchor these global agreements that I was saying in those national contexts, to encourage more gender responsive approaches. And we said gender responsive, we want to really bear in mind that when we use the word gender responsive, it's about action. It's about acknowledging the gaps and doing something to close those gaps. And that these will be a driver for transformational change and a catalyst that increases the effectiveness and efficiency of climate change initiatives. And that is something that we need to work very strongly in the coming years. Also, we need to frame women as agents of change. We cannot keep portraying them only as a vulnerable group. And it's also an opportunity for women economic empowerment, innovation beyond the household. We have been working a lot on these CC gaps, these climate change gender action plans, that has led to countries proposing very innovative actions in both mitigation and adaptation. We have looked at the decisions, and 19 countries right now worldwide have been developing these CC gaps. This has led us also to start working more intensively in the mitigation sector. All of the CC gaps so far developed looked at both issues, mitigation and adaptation, not only at the rural settings, but also at the urban settings in those countries. And again, when it comes to mitigation, they're looking beyond only household and really moving forward into bigger type of infrastructure. So in IUCN, in collaboration with OLARE and with USAID and with other partners throughout the Gecko initiative, mainly we have been devoting in trying to generate that knowledge that will allow the countries to really put action into the words and the commitments that they have done for the past 8 years. So as I said, I mean, in the energy sector, what we have learned is this need to move beyond cook stoves. Even though it is important, it is necessary and fundamental. When you look, for example, at the CIF and the Green Climate Fund, 70% of the resources being devoted to big renewable projects. We need to have guidelines and clear examples and generate a lot of the knowledge to really get involved in these bigger projects. And we also need to increase the access to these finances resources, because when we go at the national level and we talk with various multi-stakeholders, they don't know how to access the GAF. They don't know how to access resources from the Green Climate Fund. So it is fundamental that we provide more capacity and knowledge on how to really increase our capacity to access those resources. And as I said, this is probably one of the areas that we need to work more, and I hope that in the next workshops, especially the one that Fleur was mentioning that is going to happen in May, we can provide some better concrete ideas on how to move forward on this topic. Thank you very much, and that will be it. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Maggie.
Thank you, Lorena, and for your inputs and for sharing with us also what the learning process has been and how there is a need to move from the small scale renewable energy technologies and cookstoves to different pastures. I wanted to say greener pasture, but they should all be greener pastures. We've come to the end of the presentations, which means now is the time for your questions, for the questions and answers space. And I would like to invite the participants to keep on sending their questions and sharing them with us. I do have one here now for Alex, and one for Flora. Those for Lorena are coming in. I'll read them first. Alex, for you, there's a question about what are the enabling conditions in order to get involved in the design of mitigation activities in the energy sector. I guess you've presented this the graph on how this is done, at least by the World Watch Institute. And if you could elaborate perhaps a little bit more on what is the enabling environment that's necessary for these processes to move forward, and perhaps also give us a couple of pointers or ideas on how could gender be incorporated into this enabling environment, or what could be necessary for gender to be addressed.
Sure. Well, thank you first for the question. I mean, the enabling conditions themselves have become better, improved through the Paris Agreement. I hope I could showcase that a little bit. It is really a framework for action. It has a lot of financial mechanisms in it. We just heard about the Green Climate Fund, other financing tools, technical assistance that becomes available to least developed and developing countries now through the agreement that create improved enabling conditions. At the national level, the lenses that we use are basically 4 different ones, and assessment in these areas takes place because they are all 4 important, and they all have their own barriers that need to be analyzed and overcome if you want to transition to a more sustainable energy system. So the first one is the area of technology. There are technical barriers. There are often old grids, just as one example, that need to be renovated to integrate larger shares of renewables. Very often, a barrier to be overcome is a lack of technical analysis. So many countries do have, say, assessments of solar resources, wind resources, biomass resources only at a very high level, and not the kind of detailed information that you need. And we're trying to help them countries also to see how renewables and energy efficiency and grid solutions, and increasingly also storage solutions, can be integrated, because yes, it's important to have feasibility studies for each of them, but in the end, to make smart decisions, you really need to integrate them and come up with a broader technical roadmap than if you just look at them individually. And then the same can be said for other areas. So Anna, you just asked me about gender. Gender is an important part of our assessment of socio-economic of the socio-economic assessments of alternative pathways. So say 20%, 40, 60, 80% renewables coming from different sources. How would that impact women's lives? How would that impact intergenerational equality? Would jobs be created? Is generally the opportunities of people to have a better life, is that increased? And we see remarkable results there. If I can summarize all of our work in this area in the many different countries where we are active, remarkable results of positive, what's often called co-benefits, which for many countries are not the co-benefits. It's the real benefits that they are aiming for through a transition to cleaner, more sustainable energy systems. And then, I could obviously go on and on. There's financial hurdles and barriers that can be overcome by policies. There's often policies themselves in the way of larger investments into renewables, or administrative processes that are very counterproductive. If I have with a relatively small wind plan that I'm planning, I have to run through 15 different steps of getting approval for my project. Obviously, that causes human and monetary costs that are difficult for me to overcome. So there's many different examples we have developed. For those of you who are more interested in it, as part of work that we have done for the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, sort of a checklist of different hurdles from all these different areas that need to be overcome to then create the enabling conditions that I think the participant was asking me about.
Thank you, Alex. And Flor, I have one question for you here. I'm going to give you two together because they're very much related. The first is, if the draft of the technical paper you were referencing to, making reference to, would be put forward for review before its finalization in May. And then the other question is, if there are any good gender responsive stories of success or failure that could point the way forward. And perhaps this is also a question that, Lorena, if you feel you would like to address, you could do that afterwards. Flora?
Thanks, and also thank you for the questions. The draft generally doesn't get submitted for review prior to publication. There will be a consultation process on some inputs to the technical paper, that, looking to make sure that the tools and guidelines that have been identified are as comprehensive as possible, and that will go to the group of constituency contacts that we have, and we will we have a gender team email address which I can provide, which if there are inputs in relation to good tools and guidelines that that should be included in the technical paper, then that they can be sent to that email address. In relation to stories, I think one of the things that that the workshop report from the June workshop last year has a collection of the presenters who presented at that workshop provided their own experiences in many cases, and provided examples of successful projects. And I think one of the challenges, even when you do have a success story, is to understand the context in which that project was implemented, and the extent to which the action can be replicated and in many cases scaled up, because many of the stories are talking about a relatively small scale projects. And I think both Anna and Lorena can speak to the challenge of that USA and IUCN have been looking at in relation to large scale renewable energy and gender. So as I say, one of the things that we've been asked we've been tasked with is to look at how we can communicate those good practice examples it's something that we will be looking at later in this year. But I think in the meantime, there are the workshop report and a number of publications that were released during COP21 also include case studies and examples of where projects have been very successful and what the factors were that the project developers feel were contributing to that key success. So I think there are lots of stories, but it's working out whether they can be made applicable on a larger scale. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Fleur. I think it does. Lorena, would you also like to comment a little bit, perhaps, on the experiences? What could be good or bad examples and how to move forward?
Yeah, I think, well, we did a major effort. I don't know if you want to look at our last publication that is called Roots for the Future. It's a massive publication that we produced last year, trying precisely to collect the best examples and case studies and lessons learned from all around the world. But as Fleur was saying, I mean, the challenge is really to generate in areas that we don't have those good examples yet, in which there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think that this Gecko initiative is precisely in this type of works that we're having, trying to generate these alliances that are necessary to move forward in topics that are new to everyone. So I think that we have access to those examples, but the replicability of them. And I will take an example. The 1 million program that was one of the winners of Momentum for Change some years ago could be an excellent project to replicate in different countries. It's dealing with mitigation, it's looking at women as agents of change. But we need, as a community working on gender and energy and mitigations, to start generating those projects, replicating some of those lessons learned, make them available, and moving forward with the agenda. I think that we need to start thinking on not producing only good case studies, but looking at those that have the potential to be replicated and in different parts of the world. So I think that is a major challenge that we have at the moment. That is true as well with some of the renewable energy projects, and I'm going to quote again Momentum for Change, for example, one of the winners of last year on geotherm. So how can we take that and replicate at the larger scale to really have an impact in the work that we're doing? And as Alexander was saying, how can we show that these type of initiatives are going to have an impact in getting to 1.5? And how can this be worthwhile investing? So I think that with the financing mechanisms being ready, having some of these successful stories, the time to scale them up and show the difference is now.
Thank you, Lorena. I'm conscious about the time, and I'm really grateful for the participants because we've maintained a very high participation throughout the webinar. So if you could just bear with us for this final question, and then I'll ask each of the panelists to please give us in one bullet point what's their takeaway from today's presentation. But we have a very challenging question, and I wonder who would be willing to take the floor first. The question is, what could be the best way to mainstream gender into LEDs, NAMAs, and INDCs? So to the panelists, what do you think would be the best way of addressing this through the mitigation mechanisms? Lorena, perhaps you would like to take a shot first?
Yes, and probably you too, Anna. I think that, because it's precisely the work that you have been doing. I think that we need to sit down with the countries that have identified gender as a first step moving forward in their INDCs and in their NAMAs, even though we don't have access to all the NAMAs. But we know of some of them that have been doing as an entry point, and really see what are those areas that we can build in gender as they have identified, but making it operative and giving them the know-how and building with them that process. And I also think that for the donors, this is going to be a challenge, because most of the donors that are going to be investing in INDCs need to be reminded that it is part of their policies to move this forward. So we will have to do like this movement between the donors and the gender community to identify in which countries we can join efforts to move forward this agenda. And this will be true also for the financing mechanisms, and also help those that have not identified how this should be embraced by them. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. Alex, do you want to share some initial thoughts? I know gender is not your stronghold, but working with LEDs is. So from your point of view, how could we, from the gender community, how could we link with the mitigation initiatives to make a dent?
Well, I hope everybody has it sort of on their radar and on their agenda, so I'll do as well. You know, I think we have talked far too long about climate mitigation policies, you know, strangulating or constraining economic growth and social opportunity. And I think one of the great things about the last 10 years is that we really saw that the contrary is happening. I'm often asking people I speak with who doubt this and who are maybe a little bit slower in their paradigm change to name one country that has become really serious about their energy transition, that has experienced economic disadvantages. I think we now have the proof from the ground that the contrary is happening, and that includes, very importantly, the empowerment of women. So I think looking into these case studies now that exist for the first time, and thinking about how they can be scaled up and how they can be replicated in other places is one of the key tasks for us as observers, whether we're experts or whether we're decision makers in whatever sector we work. So that will be my number one recommendation here.
Okay, thank you. And Fleur, I know perhaps I'm putting you on the spot because you're from the Secretariat, and it's more about enabling parties to address gender. What could be the best way for including gender into these mitigation initiatives, or what could we do from outside also to support the work done from the Secretariat?
Thanks, Anna. I think, and that's fine, you can put me on the spot. I think one of the things that I think we've already started. I think the important thing is that there is now a focus on, quite targeted focus on things like the technology needs assessment, or on putting it together a compilation of tools and guidelines. These are things that will enable not only parties but also those who are supporting them to be able to identify ways of applying those tools to in the context of the processes like implementing NDCs. And I think the other key, and it's been said in different ways, I think the other key is the work that the financial mechanisms are doing in this area as well. I think once you have financial mechanisms making gender a priority for or a key component of the decisions they're making in relation to funding that will drive change. And I think, but that does it. I think one of the things that isn't necessarily there, and it's something that we don't focus on because the support under the convention is to developing countries, but is understanding why countries are not including gender in their communications or in their when they're talking about INDCs. What is the barrier, and understanding how that can be overcome. There will be different reasons for different countries, and that's also a challenge, is that there isn't one size fits all. But I think that's also why it's important for us to be sharing as many different stories as possible, because even though there may only be, even though something may not be applicable in one country, it may be applicable in another. So I think that's, you know, my sense is that we are already making we're already heading in the right direction.
Well, I think that's a really good and positive note. I'm conscious of the fact that we're coming to a close, but I don't want to close our webinar without having given you each about 30 seconds to give your takeaway message. And Alexander, I'll start with you to continue with the original flow of the panel presentations.
That's extremely kind, particularly because I've already gone over time before. So let's stress what I said initially, that Paris is an important moment in our life. We came to terms with a lot of the controversies of the past, but it is really just a framework of action for the future. The action now needs to really happen on the ground. It needs to materialize, and to the extent that it doesn't, we need to take the goals of Paris and put it in front of people and say, and refer to it and ask for why we're not doing more, and that includes very important gender issues. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Fleur?
Thanks. And I think I probably should stop on my last note about that we're moving in the right direction. But I think for me, the key thing here is that we have Paris, which is very important, and it's key. But we also have a framework through the convention, and it's a very useful one. The Lima Work Program on Gender will be reviewed and continue on. And I think it's important we continue to make progress, and even if that's only in small steps each time, we need to continue to build on the work that we've been doing.
Okay, thank you. And Lorena?
Well, I have to say that everybody right now that has been involved in UNFCCC is right now like in a stage of shock after all the work that was put forward into the agreement. But we cannot forget that Paris was just a step in the process of making change happen. And the challenge that we have right now is to take those decisions, to take the new framework and make it happen. And that is where I think that we have to move forward with the topic of mitigation, make it more relevant, and find our path to really do what this whole framework is about. And otherwise, it will just be good words in paper. So implementation, for me, is the challenge.
Thank you. Thank you, Lorena, and thank you, Alexander and Fleur, for your inputs. It's been a pleasure to participate with you and to have this conversation. I am sure that our audience or participants have also enjoyed it a lot. And to our participants, I again want to apologize for the technical difficulties we've encountered, but be assured that the audio of the presentation is going to be made available, and the presentations themselves also. And you would be able to find this early next week in our green platform. And Maggie will be sharing also the link with you via email. I also want to thank USAID again for their support in making all these webinars possible, and invite you all to join us on our next series, which is at the end of February, we will be working on gender and finance for renewable energy. And the flyer and invitation would be shared with you shortly next week too. On that note, I would like to thank you all and wish you a good evening and a good afternoon for those in Europe and in the Americas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Bye-bye.